And, ooh, that's a hand to...
We're gonna break down why I believe that punishment falls short. Right now, our focus is on Caitlyn and our entire team as we prepare for Saturday. Kelly, that's a fat face. It's clear who the priority is. You guys are vocal about who the priority is. You guys have never been even half as vocal for Caitlyn Clark. When Kelly is hands-on, she's the president. She could have dropped this statement last night before waiting for the league, before waiting for it to 1-game suspension for recklessly making contact with her fist to the throat area of Caitlyn Clark.
In the days since the WNBA disciplinary committee handed down its ruling, the gap between what the league decided and what its own audience believes was warranted has become the central story. A 1-game suspension and a flagrant foul penalty were the league's full response to a sequence that involved a closed fist directed toward the throat of one of the league's most prominent rookies, along with additional contact described by witnesses as a knee to the groin. For a significant portion of the fan base, that response did not come close to matching the severity of what actually happened on the court. The reaction across comment sections and message boards in the hours following the announcement was immediate and largely unified. Viewers who had watched the replay multiple times described the punishment as inadequate, with many predicting that a single missed game would do little to discourage similar conduct in the future. The recurring argument was straightforward. If the cost of a dangerous, targeted play is 1 afternoon off the bench, there is little financial or competitive deterrent preventing another player from making the same calculation in a future game. That sentiment did not exist in isolation. It built on weeks of accumulated frustration with how physical play has been adjudicated across the league this season, and it tapped into a broader conversation about whether the current disciplinary framework is built to actually protect players or simply to manage public relations after the fact. To understand why the 1-game suspension landed so poorly with the audience, it helps to look at the play itself, frame by frame, the way many fans already have. This was not a case of 2 players tangled up in a routine box-out that escalated under the pressure of a live broadcast. According to those breaking down the footage, the sequence began with a jersey pull, progressed into a closed fist moving toward the throat, and included additional contact to the groin area, all within a matter of seconds, all in front of a national broadcast audience. The rookie at the center of the play has been the most discussed figure in the league for much of the season, and the visibility of the incident meant that there was no ambiguity about what fans were watching. It happened in real time, on camera, with no place for the league to frame it as a borderline or judgment call situation. Given that level of clarity, fans expected a disciplinary response that matched the clarity of the footage. Instead, the punishment announced by the league was a single game, a number that many viewers immediately began comparing to past suspensions handed down for off-court conduct. The comparison that surfaced repeatedly involved a 7-game suspension issued in 2015 for a domestic incident that occurred away from the court, as well as a 6-game suspension tied to a legal proceeding involving impaired driving. Neither of those incidents took place during a live game. Neither put another player's physical safety at risk in front of cameras. Yet both drew significantly harsher discipline than an act of direct physical aggression that took place during active gameplay. This is where the credibility question begins to take shape, and it is the piece of the conversation that has generated the most sustained criticism. If the league's own history shows a willingness to issue multi-game suspensions for incidents that did not involve in-game player safety, then a single game for an act that did involve in-game safety raises an obvious question about how the league is weighing risk to its players relative to other concerns. Fans have been blunt in stating that the disparity makes the 1-game number look less like a calculated, safety-first decision and more like the lowest number the league believed it could get away with announcing. That perception of minimalism, more than the number itself, is what has driven so much of the frustration. A suspension is not just a punishment for the player involved. It functions as a public signal about what the league will and will not tolerate. When that signal is set as low as a single missed game following a fist to the throat, it tells every player on every roster what the actual threshold is for physical retaliation, and it tells them in clear terms. Several fans pointed out that the message sent by a 1-game suspension is not really about discipline at all. It is about cost. If the cost of dangerous physical contact is this low, the league is effectively pricing it as an acceptable risk rather than treating it as a serious violation of player safety standards. That argument has been reinforced by another thread running through the comments: the absence of any financial penalty attached to the suspension. Several viewers have specifically called for fines to accompany suspensions in cases involving player safety, arguing that a missed game alone does not carry enough weight, particularly for players on max contracts who may view a single absence as a minor inconvenience rather than a meaningful deterrent. The suggestion that has come up again and again is a combined penalty structure, multiple games paired with a financial fine substantial enough to register as a genuine consequence rather than a line in a press release. Without that financial component, critics argue, the league's punishment lacks the teeth needed to actually shape behavior going forward. The frustration has not been limited to the length of the suspension. A significant portion of the criticism has been directed at the officiating crew on the floor at the time of the incident. Fans who rewatched the sequence pointed out that the play was allowed to escalate through several distinct phases: the jersey pull, the fist moving toward the throat, the additional contact, before any whistle brought it to a stop. For many viewers, that sequence of events raises a separate and arguably more immediate concern than the suspension itself. Why did the officials on the court not intervene sooner? A swift whistle at the first sign of the jersey pull, or at the moment contact moved toward the head and neck area, could have ended the situation before it escalated to the point it ultimately reached. The fact that it did not has led to calls for the league to review not just the disciplinary process after the fact, but the in-game officiating standards that allowed the situation to develop in the first place. That call for a broader review reflects a pattern that has been building across the season rather than a single isolated complaint. Viewers have pointed to a string of plays this year in which contact toward the league's most visible players appeared to go unaddressed by officials in real time, only for the league office to issue a response well after the broadcast had ended, and the moment had already been replayed thousands of times on social media. The concern voiced repeatedly is that the league's disciplinary process has become reactive rather than preventative, responding to public pressure after a clip circulates rather than enforcing standards consistently as plays happen on the court. Some commenters have gone further, suggesting that the situation warrants a formal investigation into how technical fouls and flagrant fouls are being assessed across different players, and whether the same standard is being applied evenly regardless of who is involved in the contact. That question of consistency has become its own flashpoint. In the same week as the suspension announcement, a separate technical foul called on the rookie earlier in the season was left in place, despite her sitting close to the threshold for an automatic suspension of her own tied to accumulated technical fouls. Around the same time, a veteran player who had also picked up a technical foul predicted on camera that her own foul would be rescinded by the next morning, a prediction that turned out to be accurate. For an audience already frustrated with the one-game suspension, this additional data point reinforced the sense that the rules are not being applied evenly across the league's roster. Whether or not that perception reflects the full picture of how technical fouls are reviewed internally, it has become a significant part of the public conversation, and it has added fuel to calls for more transparency in how these decisions are made and communicated. The organizational response in the aftermath has also drawn scrutiny. Public statements from team and league leadership emphasized a commitment to player safety and a willingness to support a full review of the incident. For some fans, those statements rang hollow given the timing. The criticism voiced in comment sections was that this kind of public concern tends to surface only once an incident has become impossible to ignore, rather than being proactively built into how the league protects its players throughout the season. The skepticism is rooted in a simple observation. Statements of concern are easy to issue after a moment has already gone viral. The harder test is whether that same level of concern shows up in officiating decisions made in real time, in disciplinary rulings handed down before public pressure builds, and in consistent enforcement across every player on the roster, not just the ones at the center of a media storm. Underlying all of this is a tension between two competing explanations for what is driving the league's decisions. One explanation, favored by much of the audience, is that the punishment was set deliberately low, and that timing of the announcement following direct outreach to league communications during ongoing labor negotiations suggests the decision may have been shaped as much by managing the moment as by a clear-eyed assessment of the conduct itself. The other explanation, offered in more measured terms by some observers, is that the league's disciplinary committee may simply be applying an outdated or inconsistent framework that has not kept pace with the increased physicality and visibility of the current product. Both explanations point toward the same conclusion from the fan perspective. The current system is not producing outcomes that match the expectations of the audience that is now watching in record numbers. That audience growth is part of what makes this moment significant. The unprecedented attention on the league this season has been driven in large part by a handful of singularly popular players. And the rookie at the center of this incident is widely regarded as the most significant driver of that attention. Fans have been explicit in pointing out that the same players generating record viewership and ticket sales are the ones absorbing the most physical contact on the floor. often with what they view as insufficient protection from officials and insufficient consequence from the league office afterward. The argument many have made is not abstract. It is a direct connection between the league's commercial growth and its obligation to protect the players responsible for that growth, an obligation that, in the eyes of much of the audience, was not met by a single-game suspension. There has also been pointed commentary about the coaching response in the aftermath of the incident, specifically regarding how a potential absence due to injury was framed. When asked about the possibility of missing time, the response from the bench focused on the idea that missing a key player could allow the rest of the roster to find more balance and play more collectively. For viewers already on edge about the league's handling of player safety, that framing read as dismissive at best, suggesting that significant injury to the league's most visible player might be treated as a tactical opportunity rather than a serious concern. Whether or not that was the intended message, the optics of discussing collective opportunity in the same breath as a player's safety did not sit well with an audience already primed to view institutional responses with suspicion. What fans are asking for in the aggregate is not complicated. They want suspensions that scale with the severity of the contact involved, rather than defaulting to a single game regardless of how serious the play was. They want financial penalties attached to suspensions involving player safety, so that the cost of dangerous contact is not absorbed easily by players on substantial contracts. They want a formal accounting of officiating standards, including a clear explanation for why a sequence involving a fist to the throat and a knee to the groin was allowed to develop over several seconds before a whistle intervened. And they want consistency in how technical fouls and disciplinary reviews are applied across the roster, so that predictability and fairness are restored to a process that currently looks, from the outside, uneven at best. None of these requests are radical. They reflect a basic expectation that a professional league with a rapidly growing audience should have a disciplinary framework capable of matching the seriousness of what happens on the court. The one-game suspension at the center of this controversy has become, for many fans, a symbol of a larger gap between the league's public commitments to player safety and the actual outcomes of its disciplinary process. Closing that gap will require more than a single revised ruling. It will require a demonstrated willingness to apply consistent standards in real time to back up public statements about safety with disciplinary outcomes that reflect genuine seriousness, and to treat the concerns being raised by its own growing audience as a legitimate signal rather than a temporary wave of social media noise to be managed until attention moves elsewhere. Until that happens, the frustration on display in the aftermath of this decision is likely to resurface the next time a similar incident occurs. And given the increased physicality already shaping this season, that next test may not be far off.